on locations throughout the world.
Standing passengers, please do not lean against the doors.
Picture goers, we bring to you new films of interest.
Chicago in State is next. Doors open on the left.
The miracle of the motion picture.
Please be considerate when talking on your phone or listening to electronic devices.
Chicago's a nice town if you're looking for pizza.
Welcome to 4 Stars, a Chicago film podcast, a podcast about movies set in Chicago. I'm one of your hosts, Paco Alvarez. On this episode, my co-host Jeremy Martyr and I had the pleasure of interviewing Chicago director Michael Glover Smith about his new movie Hekla, starring and co-written by Elizabeth Stamm. If you're in Chicago, you can catch a screening of Hekla this Thursday, June 4th at 7 p.m. at Facets, featuring a Q&A with the cast and crew. I'll include a link to tickets in the show notes. If you live in Los Angeles and New York City, there will also be screenings of Hekla featuring Michael and Elizabeth later this month. This was a great conversation, and we hope you enjoy it.
All right, we want to invite to the podcast director of the new film Hekla, Michael Glover Smith. Welcome to the podcast, Michael.
Thank you so much for having me, guys.
We get to talk about the greatest city in the world because you've made a film, as many of your films are, set in the city of Chicago. Can you tell us a little bit about your Chicago origin story, how you came to make films in Chicago?
Absolutely. I moved to Chicago back in 1993 to attend DePaul University. And I originally went there for theater school, even though I was a huge movie lover. DePaul did not have a film school at that time, which is kind of ironic because now they have probably the biggest one in the city. But I realized pretty shortly after arriving here that I was not a very good actor and that I, probably belonged on the other side of the camera. So I transferred to Columbia College, which is where I got my BA. And that's where I made my first films. This was in the late 90s. So I was shooting, entirely on 16 millimeter and I was cutting on film.
That's amazing. Do you still shoot on 16? Is that a format that you've gone back to?
Sadly, no. It's a format that I am dying to shoot on again. I always tell everyone I can't wait until the day where I can raise enough money to shoot on film again.
It's interesting that you bring up your background in theater, because the film we're talking about today for Hekla is so much about that sort of cattle call process, the experience of an actor. Did you use your own experiences for this film, or was it mostly the collaboration with your co-writer?
I put a lot of things that I know to be true into the film because, Hekla is my 5th feature. So I've gone through this audition process with actors many times over the years. And let me tell you, I have developed so much sympathy for actors as a result because they live hard lives. What it was especially when I had auditions for my 2017 film Mercury in Retrograde. That was the first time I really saw actors cattle call style. I was casting in a casting agency downtown. I had a casting director, and it was her and my 2 producers. We were videotaping all of the actors who auditioned. And I just thought, man, this is so tough. These people who come here and do this, and then they leave, and then they go somewhere else, and then they do the same thing. So that was really the origin of this screenplay, was auditioning actors for that film in 2016.
And I know that the star of the film, Elizabeth Stamm, was also a co-writer. I was wondering how did you first get to know her, and like how did that partnership form?
Yeah, this is the deepest collaboration I've ever had with another actor, and I could have never made this film with an actor that I had not worked with before. She played a supporting role. In fact, she played the same character, Hekla, in my previous film, Relative. Although you don't need to have seen Relative to fully understand and enjoy Hekla, but it is the same character. So technically, this is a spin-off of my last film. But I actually met her at a film festival in Alabama called the George Lindsay Film Festival, which is a really great regional festival that is put on by the University of North Alabama. And she was there with the first film that she ever acted in, which is a movie called Bleed American. And it's a very gritty and kind of disturbing, slice of Midwestern Americana. It's basically about white trash, teenagers living in trailer parks, kind of Larry Clark-esque. And I started talking to her after the screening because I really enjoyed her performance. And she was just completely different in reality than she was in the movie. Just within 5 minutes of talking to her, I thought she was the funniest person I had ever met. And so I wanted to write. Oh, and then I found out that she lived in Chicago. That was the big surprise because they had made that movie in Indiana, and I was there with a film called Rendezvous in Chicago. And when we found out we lived in the same city, it almost felt like destiny, that I was supposed to work with her. So I basically wrote the role of Hekla in Relative for her. And that was such a great experience. It wasn't too long after we finished shooting Relative that I started talking to her about the idea of doing another movie that would just solely be about that character. And originally, I didn't ask her to co-write it. I just wrote it on my own and shared it with her. And she was really excited to do it. And then over the next couple years, it went through many, many revisions. And ultimately, I just felt like because it's such a vehicle for her that the best way to make that film and have it work, because she's literally in every scene, the best way to make that work would be for her to just rewrite the script. And so that was her contribution. Was she rewrote it, she changed all the things she wanted to change, she crossed out the lines she didn't want to say, she added the things that she did want to say. And that was a really fun way to work. And all of the changes she made were, for the best.
Yeah, Hekla is such a strong character. I'm now trying to think about Russian nesting doll style who the character in Hekla you're going to make the next film about, and which do you have an idea of which character you fell in love with in Hekla that you were like, I could spin that off?
I could do it with a lot of them. I mean, I think Blake, the pretentious experimental theater director, would be fascinating to follow. He would be great, but also, Mary Tilden, who plays Tyler. I loved working with her, and one of the things that surprised me about this film when we premiered was a lot of young people really loved this film. Which is not something I was anticipating or try. That's not an audience I was trying to court, but we premiered at that same festival in Florence, Alabama, and there were a lot of college students in the audience, and there were a lot of high school students, like theater majors in the audience, and they came up to me afterwards, and this was literally a question I got. They were like, "Hey, Michael, when are we going to get Tyler's spinoff?" There were these young, teenage girls who kind of had a crush on the character of Tyler, and they literally asked me if I was going to do that. It kind of blew my mind, but I'm like, yeah, maybe that's not a bad idea.
Yeah, does your writing process allow for you to sort of reimagine characters in that way, where you're thinking about them and they change? How did Hekla change as a character from Relative to this film?
Well, she changed a lot because I also should point out the first draft of this I wrote was in 2016. It was at the time I was doing those auditions. So this was before I ever met Liz. And it was not about a character named Hekla. It was about a character named Michaela. So it would have been a completely different movie. And it was only after I worked with Liz on Relative that I started thinking, man, I should dig out that old script and rewrite it to make it about this character. And so that's what I did. And I had to make a lot of changes because, there are a lot of callbacks to Relative in it. They're kind of like Easter eggs, like in Relative, we talked about how she was from Nebraska. So I had to, when she tells the story about visiting, Gerald Ford's birthplace outside of Omaha, Nebraska, I had to write that in. Like I was kind of, handcuffed in a way into making her from that part of the country. And so I did a lot of little things like that. But it evolved a lot because after Liz came on, she brought a lot to the table as a writer. And I think one of the things she did that I was the most grateful for is she was not afraid to make Hekla a little bit unlikable at times. Hekla comes across as a little bit selfish, I think. And I think that was a really interesting choice to make because in Relative, she's a supporting character and she's very like carefree and very happy-go-lucky and very charming. And then I think we almost see a little bit of a darker side to her in this film. And I think that's understandable. She's an artist. She's hustling. She's trying to make it. I think in particular, she's not as sympathetic to her ex-girlfriend as she might have been. And that was all Liz. Liz was not afraid to make her come across as a little bit harsh. But I loved that because I thought it was, realistic.
I'm curious about since we're a podcast that focuses on movies filmed in Chicago. I'm curious how did you choose like the locations that you filmed at? There's a breakup scene at Mimi's on Lincoln, which is close to me, and I've actually witnessed a breakup there, so that felt very true to life.
Are you sure you weren't just witnessing the shooting of the film?
I thought about that, but it was different people.
Well, Mimi's on Lincoln I love because it's right around the corner from where I live. And it's just one of my favorite restaurants. So I was kind of over the moon when they agreed to let me shoot there without charging me a fee. And I actually paid them to cater the set for that day. So that was a great experience. They're closed on Mondays, but they had their staff come in and cook us all lunch for the day. So that was amazing. But locations are very important to me. I think one of the things that really is consistent across my work is I always try and find the most appropriate location. And for this film, I was conscious of trying to show off Chicago a little bit more than I normally do, because a lot of my films are made on the north side in more residential neighborhoods. And I think it's kind of a cliche to show downtown, especially certain landmarks like the Bean. I think it's been done. It's kind of just kind of a, easy signifier. But not long before we shot all of the scenes where she's running around downtown, a lot of those shots come early in the film. I actually was on a date with my partner. We were walking along the river, and I thought, man, it's really beautiful down here. Like architecturally, there are a lot of buildings here I really love, like Marina Towers. I love Marina Towers, and that's the cover of a Wilco album. That's an iconic Chicago building, and I don't think it's a cliche to show Marina Towers, and I also feel that way about the Wrigley building. So I was just trying to show locations that I loved primarily, and I was lucky that we were able to get all of those shots without getting arrested.
How did you shoot the stuff on the trains?
We did it all with all of the exterior scenes were done without permits. But I also know that if you do not have a tripod, you're allowed to shoot on the train. So we were within our legal rights. We just did it guerrilla style. And, something really funny happened. She's on the train. She's kind of reading the script for the audition she's going to do. There was a woman on the train who has this big, crazy hair. Her name is Lisa. And she was not an extra. She was just someone who happened to be there. And she said, "What are you guys doing?" And we said, "Oh, we're making a movie." And I said, "Do you want to be in it?" And I said, "Yeah, just sit next to our actress." So she has on one, Liz has on one side of her our first assistant director, Jason. And then on the other side is this woman who I thought had a really cool look, who was, just curious about what we were doing. And when we had our Chicago premiere at the Music Box, I invited that woman, Lisa Carlson. I got her on the guest list, and I think she was pretty thrilled to see herself on the big screen.
You mentioned that you've been filming in Chicago since the 90s. Yeah, I guess like what has been filming in the city since that over that time period been like?
Well, I didn't shoot a lot in Chicago after I graduated. I went away to grad school in California, which is where I got my master's. And then when I came back, I actually didn't make anything for a really long time because, much like when I was at Columbia, when I was in grad school, I also only ever shot on film. And then I graduated in 2004, which is probably the worst time to graduate from film school because I literally came back here and everybody was shooting on digital, video. On videotape at that time. That was kind of like the early days of mumblecore, and I was just felt completely out of tune with that. And so I didn't make anything for a long time. And then it wasn't until about 5 years later that I thought, man, I should take advantage of my degree and my knowledge and try and, make a short film. And so in 2009, that's when I kind of made my first significant short on digital. Um, so I don't know if I can really say how the process of filming has changed. I think I've gotten better as a filmmaker. That's the real difference. I've gotten smart about how to make a micro budget feature, and how to make it look good. I mean, people have said to me, "Oh, Hekla is so much more ambitious than Relative." And the funny thing is, we actually shot it in less time and we shot it on a lower budget. But I think it actually does look more ambitious because of the way we show off the city. And we did that we did that with no money. The expensive days were when we shot inside the Den Theater because I had to pay a location fee to shoot there for 2 12-hour days. But so, just learning where to spend the money and learning how to be smart about getting your exterior shots. That was a learning process for me.
Have you any horror stories of days that went over, shoots that went long? What are some things to avoid for the young filmmakers who might be listening to this interview?
Well, this was a pretty drama-free shoot. I mean, I've gotten I've gotten better over time, but one thing did happen on the first day that was kind of a nightmare, which is that we had permission to shoot in a bar, and we were going to shoot a dinner scene in a bar. We were going to treat it like a restaurant, and no one was there to let us in on the day when we were supposed to shoot. So I literally ran up and down Irving Park Road just asking every restaurant if we could shoot there. And lo and behold, Cafe Belgrade just let us do it. And they were open. And so we shot that scene outside. And that was a little bit, that was a little nerve wracking, because I thought, man, I don't know if this is going to play as night because the sun was shining bright. But then I thought, oh, we can change the dialogue and establish that it's, they're having an early dinner at 5:30 and people will buy it. And so that's what we did. But, I think my advice to young filmmakers would be, just be flexible, stay calm when things don't go when things don't go right or things don't go according to plan, just be prepared to shift gears and think on your feet and try and solve problems without freaking out too much. That's the best advice I have.
Yeah, Michael, I was a high school film teacher for a while, and I am constantly teaching my students that a good director goes with whatever they're given, able to easily land on their feet, like a cat when they're thrown out of a window, because that's what filmmaking is. And
That's right.
I do find that my students think that everything is going to go according to plan, and then they'll come to me and be like, actually, this went wrong, and this went wrong. And I was like, what did I tell you? This is exactly what filmmaking is. And your experiences can be sorted into the good and bad ones from how you react, not whether or not anything went wrong, because the law of the universe is that things will go wrong. And I realized that Hekla is the culmination of many films, many experiences. And so I'm happy that this one is at least as drama free, like you're describing. But even then, running up and down Irving is a pretty great image for our listeners to think about.
I was running too because I knew we didn't have a whole lot of time. It was like that was the first half of the day, and then we had to be somewhere else for the second half. So, but you're right. I mean, for all of the things that go wrong, where you have to just kind of roll with the punches, the flip side of that is there will be happy accidents that happen on set and things that are better than what you had imagined. And when those things happen, it's like a miracle. I'll give you one example from Hekla. One moment that always brings the house down comes very early in the film, right before her first audition. She has a pratfall where she's leaning back in her chair and she falls over. And that was the second take and the final take because I knew it was perfect. But her pratfall was amazing. She, gets up, she attempts to put the table and the lamp that she knocked over back together, or she pulls the drawer out of the table. That was all written into the script. But then as the casting director comes out of the audition room and has a conversation with her, a painting on the wall falls off of the wall and knocks the table over and the lamp over again behind her. That was not scripted. And I've had people say, oh, I thought there was a string that someone pulled to make that happen. That literally was an accident. And it was the best kind of accident because it's like the punchline to the whole scene.
That's magnificent. I love those happy accidents. You have these vignettes throughout the film that are shot in color. What was the decision to shoot black and white for most of the film, and then have these splashes of color?
Yeah, that's a great question. I actually wanted to shoot the whole film in black and white. That was my original idea. And then I hired a really good production designer named Heather Kuhlman, and she's actually going to be doing the Q&A with me at Facets on Thursday night. So I'm really happy for her to tell this story herself. But she talked me into using color, and she basically said, Mike, Hekla is the most colorful character ever, and you have to find a way to get color into this movie. And so that's when I thought, oh, yeah, she's right. If the whole film is if most of the film is in black and white, and then we cut away to what's happening in Hekla's brain while she's auditioning, those sequences could be in color. But I have a secret, Jeremy, that not a lot of people know about. Those fantasy sequences, I was literally not present when they were shot. I hired a second unit director and he shot those scenes. He spent 2 days with Liz, with the production designer, Heather, and with our hair and makeup artist, Heather Kuhlman. And they went off and did that on their own. And I could have been there if I wanted to, but to be honest with you, I don't know. For me, this whole the whole process of making this film was kind of an exercise in seating control. And I thought, for Liz to fully take ownership of this character, it'll be better if she spends 2 days being Hekla without me being there. And then that way, when I show up on day 3, she will show me who Hekla is. And so, yeah, that was a lot of fun. And I kind of thought, well, if I don't like what they shoot, I can just not use it. And then when I saw what they did, my editor, Eric Marsh, and I saw what they did, and I said, oh my God, we're going to use all of this. It looks amazing.
Yeah, I'm happy you brought Eric Marsh's name up because he's a great editor and a great film mind in Chicago. He edited one of my favorite trailers at the Music Box, my former place of employment, for the Spaghetti Western series.
Oh yeah, he knocked that out of the park.
That's truly one of the best pieces of editing that I've seen. This film is magnificently edited. Can you talk a little bit about that process of stitching it together, of working with Eric and working with Liz and the rest of your collaborators on putting Hekla together?
Absolutely. I'm really glad that you asked about that because nobody ever asks about editing, and it's really the most important part of filmmaking. I mean, that's where the movie really comes together. And I'm really lucky that Eric and I have the relationship that we do because he's now cut 3 features that I've directed, plus 2 shorts. Plus trailers for all of those films. So he's really my closest collaborator in terms of crew, because when it comes to cinematographers, I use a different cinematographer every time. And oftentimes it's because I work with young people and they end up moving to LA. And so, I'm lucky that Eric is, he's here for the long haul. But Eric and I have a special relationship. He works very differently than any other editor that I know of. He starts cutting as soon as we start shooting. So every day he comes to our set, he picks up the footage on a drive, he takes it home, and he starts cutting. He works very fast. And so on the second day of shooting, Eric is literally sending me the footage he shot the previous day. And I show it to my collaborators. Like, I will show Liz, I'll be like, hey, you want to see what we did yesterday? And so on the second day of shooting, she was watching the opening credits sequence because he had already cut that together. And that's a really cool way to work because that gets the actors so excited when they see the footage. Like, it helps, I think it helps their performances. And by the time we're done shooting, we have a full assembly because by the time he's cutting the footage from the last day, everything else is in place. And it's more than an assembly because not only has he put everything into the timeline, the earliest stuff he's already worked on extensively. So he's already massaged the first couple days to a place where it's pretty refined. And then when I come in, I don't even set foot into the editing room until he has a rough cut. And that means I have a lot of trust in him. And, it blows my mind that other directors don't work that way. I know a lot of directors who cut their own stuff or they want to be there with their editor from the beginning. And I think that's always a bad idea because, first of all, if you don't like what your editor did, you can always undo it. You can I have a very good memory. So I'm always, if he uses a take that I don't like, I can always say, you used the wrong take. Try the one before this or whatever. And then the other thing about working that way is sometimes to go along with what we were saying about happy accidents, sometimes he'll do something that I would have never imagined could be done. Like, I'll give you a concrete example from Hekla. In the opening credits montage, it's her jogging. She's like physically exerting herself, trying to kind of get into a zone. And I had a shot where she runs and stops at a lighthouse and puts her hand on the lighthouse. And in my mind, that was going to be the final shot of the credit sequence, because I thought, oh, she's reached the end of her jog and she's stopping because it's the end of her destination. And that'll be the last shot we see before it says directed by Michael Glover Smith. And Eric put it in the middle of the montage. And I said, why did you do that? And he goes, oh, I figured she was just pausing and taking a break, and then she would resume the jog right after that. And I thought, oh man, that's so cool. So I just let him keep it that way, And if as a director I was there from the beginning, that would have never happened.
I will keep talking about editing because it's my favorite thing. I was an editor for years, and I do think that directors being too close, honestly, anyone who is on set, a producer, a director, anyone who's too close to the filming of it has an issue killing their darlings. And so being too close to that editing process can make it very difficult. I mean, everyone has their own process, and sometimes having a more difficult editing process is good for directors. But for me, as an editor, having someone who can have some perspective, like an editor who was not as involved with decision making, or even the it was so hard to get that take, we have to use it mentality is really not the best thing sometimes what serves a film. So it's great that that's your process with Eric, and that you allow for that discovery of retelling the story that way.
I totally agree. And also, I should point out, after we have a rough cut that he and I are both happy with, then we show it to about 10 other people. And, it's good, I think, to have a variety of people, like people who worked on the movie and then people who didn't work on the movie, but who maybe kind of know what it is that you did. And then to find people who really have no clue what the movie is at all. And then, have them all kind of watch it individually and then compare notes. And I always say, if you get the same note from multiple people independently of each other, they're always right. So I try to be, shrewd about editing and just eliminating anything that doesn't work. And we cut out a lot of stuff for this film, including stuff that I liked a lot, but we just didn't really have the room for it. I mean, this is a micro budget feature film, and I think 89 minutes is a great runtime for a micro budget feature. I mean, it's a big ask, for someone to stick around for too much longer than that. So that was important to me to get it under 90.
You begin the film with a tribute to David Lynch. Can you talk a little bit about what that tribute meant to you, what his films mean to you, and how they inspired anything, if anything, in Hekla?
Yeah, it's funny that the film is dedicated to David Lynch, because even though he is one of my favorite filmmakers, I wasn't really thinking about him while we were shooting it. And I didn't decide to dedicate it to him until we were in post-production. Like, I remember kind of looking at the footage with Eric and saying, I think we should dedicate this to David Lynch. So that was a very late decision, but I've been a fan of his work since I was 13 years old. I saw Eraserhead as a 13-year-old child when I rented it from Blockbuster Video in Charlotte, North Carolina. I saw Blue Velvet shortly thereafter. I was probably too young to fully understand it, but it still blew my mind. And then I saw, the pilot episode of Twin Peaks in April of 1990 when I was 14. And the reason why I watched it was because I was a fan of Eraserhead and Blue Velvet, and I heard that the guy who made those films had a TV show coming out. So, I've revisited his work, on a very regular basis ever since then, and working with the great Wendy Roby has been one of the greatest pleasures of my life. I cast her as the mom in Relative, And she and I got along extremely well. We became friends in real life because she lives, right here in Chicago, and it does mostly theater these days. But she and I had a great working relationship. And then I asked her to, and for your listeners who maybe don't recognize that name, she plays Nadine on Twin Peaks. She's a very iconic character on that show. But so when I came up with the idea of using narration in Hekla, she was the first person I thought of to narrate the movie. And I was so glad that I asked her to do that because she brought a lot to the narration. Some of it, like the narration at the end when she's talking over the Macbeth play, that was her just talking off the top of her head. That was not even scripted. And it was amazing because we had a rehearsal one night where it was Liz and a bunch of the other actors, and that's where we recorded Wendy's narration, because I just thought, I don't want to do this, in a room where it's just me and Wendy and another and a sound engineer. I kind of want Wendy to feel like she's part of the movie. And so Liz was in the room with her, and Wendy really likes Liz a lot. They got along well during Relative. And I originally had written something for Wendy to say that is the opposite of what she actually says in the film. Originally, she was going to talk about how Lady Macbeth is the most cold-blooded character in all of Shakespeare. And Wendy goes, I don't want to say this. She's like, she has the script in front of her. She goes, because she's played Lady Macbeth. And she goes, I think Lady Macbeth is the least cold-blooded character in all of Shakespeare, which goes against the conventional wisdom of how that character is portrayed and how she's thought of in popular culture. And so I said, well, okay. I go, do you want to just take a few minutes and write down your thoughts on Lady Macbeth, and then you can say that? And she goes, no, I want to just say it to her. And she points at Liz. And I said, okay, well, let's just roll the tape and you can just tell her what you think about Lady Macbeth. And that's exactly what happened. And that's really my favorite moment in the movie, is at the very end when the narrator says, I think she's amazing, because she's talking about Lady Macbeth. But I think she's also talking about Hekla in a way. And where Eric chose to place that in the film over Liz kind of taking her bows at the end of the play, I think it's really beautiful. So the Wendy connection was another thing that I think kind of pushed me towards dedicating this to David Lynch. And then the final piece of the puzzle was we cast a guy named Sandro Miller as the headshot photographer. The scene where she goes to get her headshots done, which happens halfway through the movie, we call it an intermission. He is a very famous photographer and filmmaker who lives in Humboldt Park. He does all of the photography for Steppenwolf Theater. And so I asked him to play, if he would be interested in playing himself, and he agreed right away. And I didn't know at the time that he had made a film in collaboration with David Lynch's foundation, where John Malkovich plays all of these characters from David Lynch's films. And when I found that out, I thought that was really interesting, because he knew Lynch, he photographed Lynch, and he made this movie with Lynch. And then when we went there to shoot the scene, he had hanging on his wall a shovel that had been spray painted gold. And that is a reference to Twin Peaks: The Return. And right before we shot our scene in his studio, I pointed at the shovel on the wall and I said, shovel your way out of the shit. And he laughed. And I said, Sandro, did you know that Wendy Roby is going to be the narrator of this film? He had no clue. And in Twin Peaks: The Return, there's a very memorable scene where Wendy, marches down the street towards Big Ed's gas farm, and she's holding the golden shovel. So, I'm an atheist. I don't really believe in the supernatural, but sometimes coincidences happen that I think are so um, astounding that you can't help but wonder if there isn't some sort of mystical core to the universe. So my long-winded answer to your question is all of those things kind of converged and sort of pushed me towards dedicating the film to David Lynch.
That's awesome. That's really great. You spoke a bit about how the audition process inspired this movie and the initial screenwriting, but I'm curious about you. You initially started college for theater, and this movie is a lot about theater, and I'm curious about what what the connection between theater and cinema means to you in this movie.
Well, there's a lot of overlap. And, for me, the important thing was to show a lot of variety in terms of her auditions because I didn't, for an actor to do four auditions in one day, that's not uncommon. That's a busy day in the life of an actor. And I interviewed a lot of actors and I asked them, what is the most number of auditions you've ever done? And they all said four. So, but I didn't want, I knew that was going to be the bulk of the film. So I thought, okay, she needs to audition for a film. And that's the first audition. And that scene that she's using in the audition, that is a scene from my film Mercury in Retrograde. So it's a little, Easter egg for anyone who's seen my previous work. They'll recognize that as a scene from that film. Um, and then I wanted to have, and also that scene is important because it's the only audition she does where she has a scene partner. I wanted her to have one audition where she's interacting with another actor. And then I thought it would be a good idea to have her do an audition where she's asked not to read lines from a script, where the director just wants to interview her and is trying to kind of push her to say interesting things. And again, that's not uncommon. I mean, I like to interview actors when I audition them because I feel like you can learn a lot about um, how an actor might be useful to you based on their real life personality. You can learn a lot about the intelligence level of an actor and just a lot about their emotional life by talking to them. So I decided to make that a whole audition, and then and then I wanted to have her do a classical monologue, either something from Oscar Wilde or Shakespeare, and I ended up finding that great comedic monologue from Oscar Wilde's A Woman of No Importance. And then in contrast to that, I wanted her to have a commercial audition. And I just wanted it to be the stupidest thing that I could think of. And because I have friends who are actors and they frequently will complain about commercial auditions, about how they have to say the stupidest dialogue. And I actually had a friend who auditioned for a mac and cheese commercial, and she had to say something like, "This cheese sauce is driving me wild." And it's really hard to say that and sound sincere. So that's how the idea of the douche commercial was born. I thought it would be like a kind of fun way to give the viewer tonal whiplash to go from a douche commercial to Oscar Wilde. And again, it's not unrealistic for an actor to have to do that.
Yeah, and I love watching the actor interpret the scene twice in a row. That the acting choices between the two, watching the same exact lines be delivered in two different ways, both one in black and white, one in color, was really a nice touch. It weirdly reminded me of 6 Feet Under, the pilot of 6 Feet Under, with the ads that are cut in. Just that acting style, that arch, ridiculous, over the top, but then with grounded side to it as well.
I've never seen 6 Feet Under, but I'm glad that that worked for you because again, we had a lot of options in terms of how we used those fantasy sequences, and that was the other thing was Eric and I wanted to use those cutaways in a different way every time. So you know, in the first audition, we see her read through the scene twice, and we thought, okay, we'll put the fantasy in between those two read throughs because it's almost like she gets into the zone before she does it the second time, and that's when she really crushes the audition. And then for the douche commercial, like we had the option of cutting away to her in the middle of it, but I thought no, it'll be better if we see it in its entirety twice because it's all I almost wanted viewers to wonder if that was the commercial. Like, are we flash forwarding into the future and is this the literal commercial?
Yeah, that's definitely like the feeling I got. As I thought like she got the part,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
also like the other idea of it being like this is Hekla not taking it too seriously. And I did like that that aspect. You've talked a little bit before about that thing of young people of moving on from Chicago of using Chicago as a stepping stone to LA or other places. What about Chicago brings you back to making films here? And what are some sort of future plans that you have for making films here?
Well, first of all, I agree with you guys. Chicago is the best city in the world. I'm never going to leave. you know, and it's funny because I go to New York and LA all the time, oftentimes to screen films. Like we are literally going to be screening this movie in New York and LA in this month. Um, but it's and I like to visit those places, but man, New York, everybody lives in the smallest shittiest apartment no matter how much money you make. You live in the tiniest apartment. It's horrible. And I was just in New York for a book signing. I have a lot of friends who live in New York, and I literally posted this uh, story on Instagram saying, "Hey, can anyone put me up on their couch for a night? I'm coming into town for one night only." I got one response from one friend who said, I think my couch is too small. I don't think you'd be comfortable." And I was so offended because I thought, you know what? I'll sleep on your floor. I don't care, but I didn't say that. I ended up spending $200 on an Airbnb. And people, the apartments are so tiny. Nobody even has a guest bedroom. Chicago, my partner and I have a 2 bedroom in North Center. We don't pay a lot of money for it, but we have a guest bedroom. If anybody wants to come and stay with us, they can. It's amazing. I live across the street from Trader Joe's. I live a stone's throw from Mimi's on Lincoln, the best breakfast sandwich in Chicago. So I love this city. It's very livable. It's it's very friendly. It's the Midwest, for God's sake. It's a city of neighborhoods. And if you're an artist in Chicago, it's very common to have a lot of friends who are not artists, which is great. And, when you go to LA, I talked shit about New York. I want to talk a little shit about LA. When you
You're
go out
welcome
there,
here, Michael.
every, everybody in LA either is part of the entertainment industry or is part of an industry that serves the entertainment industry. Everybody, and that's all they talk about. It's terrible. You go to a film screening in LA, afterwards everyone is like, "So what are you doing now?" And then everyone is trying to prove that they're doing something, and it becomes this, everyone, it just feels like you're prostituting yourself. The way that you have to talk about your work is gross. In Chicago, the focus is on the work itself. And so I love Chicago as a city, and I love filmmaking in Chicago. And I think we have an amazing community of filmmakers here. I should point out, this film was produced by Sweet Void Cinema, And that working with those guys and gals and non-binary individuals was an amazing experience because I worked out a very unusual deal. They crewed up my film in exchange for co-ownership of the film. And that saved me a lot of money. But that was Jack McCoy, the founder of Sweet Void. He came to me and he basically said, I see you're making a film. Do you need some help? And I said, yes. And now he's like a 35% owner of the movie. And I could have never gotten the film made without him. And, that was a deal that he and I just came up with on our own. And it's highly unusual. And that strikes me as a very Chicago kind of collaboration.
Do you have a name for your cinematic universe? There's like Kevin Smith has the Views universe.
I said this once as a joke because all of my films are related in some way. I called it the Gloververse.
The Gloververse. I love it. Coined here.
Nice ring.
Well, that's good. Other than Mimi's on Lincoln, do you have a recommendation for a place to eat in the city of Chicago that is part of your heart?
I was going to recommend Mimi's on Lincoln because it's in the movie, but aside from Mimi's and aside from Cafe Belgrade, which I also shouted out earlier, my favorite spot for dinner is the Duck Inn in Bridgeport on the south side. If you've never eaten there, you got to check it out. I would describe it as elevated comfort food.
Duck Inn in Bridgeport. That's a good.
Yeah. INN. Absolutely phenomenal.
That's a good call. I love each neighborhood here in Chicago has its own unique culture and incredible options for eating. So it's nice to hear that you have taste outside of the North Side, because the North Side has some great food, but so does the South Side, so does the West Side of Chicago.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And while I have filmed mostly on the North Side, I actually shot. I've actually shot in Bridgeport. Rendezvous in Chicago, the entire third story, that's Bridgeport, and that was a blast shooting down there. So I celebrate the North Side, the South Side.
Yeah, it's a beautiful city we live in, isn't it? Michael, you have a screening of your film this upcoming Friday, correct?
No, it's Thursday night, June 4th at 7:00 p.m.
I had it written down wrong. June 4th at 7:00 p.m. at Facets. Everybody, please buy tickets. Support independent filmmakers at an independent cinema like Facets. And thank you so much for coming on to have a conversation with us, Michael.
Thank you guys so much for having me. I'm a fan of your podcast, and I'm down to do it anytime.
Please be considerate when talking on your phone or listening to electronic devices.